why didn't Leia use her force powers to get them out of the cave?
Remember when I pointed out that Leia's force pull was in zero gravity? She doesn't have to be very strong to do it. She can barely be able to use force and just nudge herself in that direction. The cave has tons of fucking rocks. That requires much more force attunement.
How did Finn drag Rose across the battlefield and back to the cave so quickly? If I really wanted to, I could make a whole separate video just laying out plot holes in this film that either don't make sense or create inconsistencies with what we've seen before.
Okay, the problem with that sentiment is that you can do that with anything, you chuckle fuck! I mean, sure, the last one kind of valid and just plot convenient, but that's the thing. There's a difference between saying that there's a flaw and saying that the entire movie is awful because of something like that. And sure, you had a lot of evidence, but when I'm able to, in a sentence or two, prove almost everything you've said wrong, your debate of the plot being full of giant holes becomes full of giant holes in and of itself.
But this is already pretty lengthy, and I want to try and keep things shorter this time around.
Jesus Christ, that laughed so hard I started throwing up. So, what was your actual point?
Much less I get complaints from idiots trying to dismiss my critiques by saying that my video's length is too long for them.
So, we're just going to ignore the original context and how something got mentioned about you calling Rey a Mary Sue, and he was responding to that with a little bit more information about you in a tweet. We're also going to assume this is the only thing that this person has ever had to say about you. I didn't bother looking up if he had anything else to say about you at no time. Yeah, let's say these are the only things he had to say about the video at all. Hot damn, for one, am I gonna love it when somebody pushes this one in your face. But to be honest, I'd normally feel bad about potentially hurting somebody's ego by going into Boonslayer trademark, overkill trademark. But with comments like this, really works to ease my quandary about telling you to consume a plate of fecal excretion, you know?
And while we're on the subject, I want to take a moment to apologize for something because it was really dumb of me to do. I just want to say I sincerely apologize for that stab I took at Mauler in my original review. I don't know what made me feel the need to make that comment, but it was a really juvenile and childish way to dismiss the time and work he put into his review. I don't know. Maybe it's because I was cynical at the time and I was prejudiced to the idea of a review of something being longer than the thing itself, which just made me look really hypocritical since I ended up making my own review being longer than the thing itself. It was a really jerk-ass thing to do, and I was being dismissive of him for no good reason. It was really unfair and I could have handled it a lot better. So, Mauler, if by some chance you find this, I really am sorry about what I said. Hopefully we can let bygones be bygones and try to move forward from there. So, with all that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the big three. Kylo Ren, Little Miss Perfect, and Luke Skywalker.
So let me get this straight. Or gay, actually, that's more accurate. You tell us you're shifting the characters, then dial back to talking about a theme in the movie, and then go on a tangent that has nothing to do with the movie, which is admitting you did something hypocritical in your original review, before going back into characters. And this is all in relation to the segment on internal consistency. You know, I almost want to believe that you did this on purpose now, and you're not just incompetent, but you just admitted that this shit happens in your videos on accident to the point where it can call for an apology, so I fucking can't.
Might as well start with Kylo since it's easy to shit on emos. Now, Kylo Ren is what would happen if you took Anakin from episode 2, extracted his whiny attitude, combined it with the essence of a potential school shooter, and placed it into a vial before injecting it into Adam Driver. A petulant, overly angry, unstable, deranged, sociopathic nutcase who's prone to adolescent tantrums and psychotic tendencies.
And congratulations, you have understood the point of the character. Fuck, even his lightsaber's instability reflects this anger and psychosis. What? Is your complaint gonna be that he's not Darth Vader?
Now at first I was willing to hesitate on that description of his character, because after the scene where he destroys his helmet symbolizing how he's growing out of his Vader worship, he started developing into a more calm and collective character. And for the time, it seemed like an interesting direction for his character to go. Actually taking the time to develop your antagonist and making him more than a one-dimensional angsty edgelord, that's great. But then he kills Snoke and just reverts to being a cold-blooded killer for no reason. It literally comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't just discard previous character traits wholesale in the middle of a character's development. Him being unhinged and irrational while still being capable of making calculated maneuvers is actually part of the threat of this particular villain. And what separates him from previous villains, The first movie told the story of him learning to take control of that anger, and this movie tells of him struggling with his relationship with the light side of the Force in much the same way that Rey's story is about a struggle with the dark side of the Force. This movie ends without a clear winner in that regard either, as symbolized by the fact that he didn't get to strike down the one who inadvertently pushed him to the dark side. And yes, I'm very much defending Kylo's redemption in the third movie. Fuck me, I guess, because this movie actually does a good job of setting up that such an outcome was possible, even if it's not a good outcome to work with. And on top of that, you're complaining about him being less cold and calculated when him killing Snoke was the most cold and calculated move that he pulls off in the first two movies. Like, he tricks Snoke into thinking that Kylo is loyal to him, only to kill him and take the mantle of Supreme Leader for himself. How is that not a calculated move? In this movie, his unbridled rage and cold demeanor go from being two halves split apart to becoming one persona that displays both traits. The fact that he leans more into his uncontrollable side is part of the point.
I swear, his character flip-flops just as badly as Rose, where he tries to be reserved and focused, just to go back to being a thoroughly violent nutjob all over again.
Bipolar disorder, real medical condition, can actually be something caused by trauma, like a childhood attempted murder by your mentor, for example. You know, a completely unrelated example.
And it actually gets really disturbing at times.
Yeah, it's almost like Kylo's supposed to be disturbing, fuck you!
Remember this scene?
I want every gun we have to fire on that man.
Jesus Christ! Anakin Skywalker at his most furious was never this unhinged, ordering all those walkers to just repeatedly shoot Luke over and over and over, while watching the whole thing with so much wrath and murderous intent, to the point where even his own soldiers are unnerved by it.
If you don't say something that isn't just explaining the actual point of the villainous character in the next few seconds, I'm gonna do that to you. And seriously, you mean to tell me that you didn't pay attention to all the explanation of why Kylo hates Luke and not get why this sort of violent reaction fits with the character? Oh wait, that's right. You're using it as an example of his manic state and not explaining the first word about why this makes him bad, other than negging a mental disorder and suffering. Seriously, fuck you!
This is the kind of thing you do when you hate a person beyond any sense of logic. Not only is this uncomfortable, but they try so desperately to get you to take it seriously, to the point that in a strange way, it's actually kind of laughable. People have literally made memes out of this moment.
I'm skipping over your memes, and while you would have a valid point here, you know, this is supposed to be intense, but it comes off kind of funny. Hey, remember how part of your point about Star Wars culture and iconography is the fact that people parodied Star Wars throughout the ages? This is that! This thing, it is that! So it's a bad thing here, and an indication of iconic status in the rest of Star Wars because... Why?
Fuck me, bitch.
And when people find the memes more entertaining than the writing quality that went into the scene itself, that's not a good sign.
How do you know they find it more entertaining? And again, people make fun of Darth Vader revealing he's Luke's father. Does it mean they think that the writing is bad? Memes are also not an indication that something is good either, mind you, but you are pulling things out of your ass because memes, and to my recollection, that's Richard Gere's job.
What was even the point of this? You were setting up something interesting with Kylo by giving him a more calm demeanor, and then you just decide to do nothing with it.
Alright, fuck you, I think we're done here.
The movie being a complete waste of time because his character just goes back to square one. Imagine if Tony Stark was going through his arc about learning to be a more responsible person who uses his wealth to help people and not waste his life, just to go back to being a self-centered playboy. That is the kind of backwards writing that Star Wars has fallen to.
Tony Stark is actually a really good example of the point I'm making. In the Iron Man movies, he was intentionally written to not throw out the imperfections of the person he actually was, because a lot of superhero movies have a tendency to do that, and it's not a very nuanced take of it, the end result being that the character has more of an individual personality than lol superhero. Like, he's still a playboy and self-centered, but he's less of that and has wrinkles added to the character. Those wrinkles become more defined in future films. That's how a story arc works, you donkey! Oh, and one more very obvious point to hammer in how apples to oranges your comparison is. Tony Stark is the protagonist, and Kylo Ren is the antagonist!
Why are we supposed to care about this sleazebag? Why are we supposed to find Kylo's character endearing or complex or well-written when he's none of those things?
Endearing? No, you're not supposed to find him endearing. Almost like he's the villain or something? I don't know, seems weird. Complex? Yes, because having a character have vast disparities in personality that both represent part of his psyche isn't complex at all. I can prove to you that the character is well written, but also not the same as other Star Wars villains, because if he was, it would just be a copy and paste and not good writing, you fucking chodeburger.
I mean, he might have been if they stuck with that calm demeanor, but now he's just angry. That's it. He's angry. I have described his entire character to you. There is nothing else to say about this man. He's just Kratos without the complexities that made him an endearing anti-hero.
Are you basing him being only angry on, like, one scene? Hell, he's still calm during the entire interaction with Rey where he kills Snoke. You don't think that's him showing something other than anger? But then he's angry in a scene where he has someone to be angry at. Oh, and you just had to bring up complexities with Kratos, didn't you? Yeah, nothing complex about him debating whether or not to kill his mom, and his hesitation in part giving the Resistance a chance to fight back, right? And did you forget how he clearly lied about killing Snoke? Dude, Kylo Ren is more complex than Kratos, especially since most of Kratos' complexities were only brought into play in the most recent God of War game, you know, like 4 or 5 games into the series, while Kylo Ren has struggles involving family and feelings of betrayal in his first appearance. And he's not even an anti-hero until the 3rd movie, you chuckle fuck!
I mean, what about his backstory are we supposed to find compelling? Do we even need to draw any comparisons? Actually, I got the perfect comparison. Anakin Skywalker. He was born into slavery, grew up without a father, 90% of his childhood was shit. He was disrespected by everyone, manipulated by both the Jedi and the Emperor. He watched his mother die a horrible death, lost the love of his life and his best friend, separated from his children, lost everything and everyone he tried so hard to protect. And to top it all off, he had to spend the rest of his life in a robotic suit after being nearly burned to death.
Not all characters are complex because of their backstory, and detail doesn't mean complexity. It just means there's more to show why a character is the way they is. Kylo, in comparison with Anakin, is written with a singular inciting incident in mind, Luke seeing the dark side ending and looking like he's trying to kill him. Hell, Luke himself is also an example of a character whose actual backstory is farm boy with a secret Jedi lineage that's even less complex than Kylo's. Most of the backstory you're talking about with Anakin are things that play out during the movies. It's not even his backstory, as a matter of fact. Oh, but let's talk about that degraded by everyone around him thing. Kylo is also degraded by people around him. He's viewed as a threat by Luke, he's viewed as inferior by Snoke, he's viewed as a liability by Hux. The only people who don't hate him are Han and Leia, and the fact that he can't separate himself from caring about them is part of the reason for his degradation within the First Order. Having the last bits of compassion you still have be the reason others don't like you is more complex than everyone looking down on you because it's different people viewing you differently.
But the backstory is only part of it. The real complexity comes from how Anakin is written and how his character arc is developed over the course of the series.
Oh, so, you know, half the shit you said as part of the backstory then.
Now, the prequels have problems, like a pretty good amount of problems, but I always found Anakin to have a more compelling character arc than people give him credit for. We've all made fun of how whiny he is in episode 2 or how annoying he is in episode 1, but when you look more into it, there's actually not a bad character arc lying beneath the cracks. His story is a cautionary tale of how a hopeful and idealistic person was twisted and manipulated by both sides of a political-military conflict, setting off a series of events that gradually transform him into the galaxy's most feared tyrant.
Which took 3 movies in order to tell. And you're judging Kylo against 1 movie. You yourself are also pointing out what you don't like about the single movie aspects of Anakin's character arc. What?
It's done in a way where it's hard to blame him for becoming a villain, because so many of the things that contributed to his downfall were completely out of his control.
Oh look, another single sentence I get to spend a whole damn page on. Based. So, first let me address this thought process that Anakin turning was somehow not his fault. I mean, sure, the Jedi Council were kind of sticklers. He was facing pressure from both sides, but at the end of the day, he was the one who needed to choose what was best. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi risked their reputation on even training the kid, and the discipline of the Jedi Order is very strict. So if he's some kind of chosen one of the Force, leaving him untrained was far less likely to result in him taking to the Jedi way than actually trying to teach him, even if he was too old. And guess what? That still did fucking work at the end. It wasn't Palpatine who killed all those younglings, it was Anakin. There's no hard to blame here. There's just a difference between right and wrong. From his point of view, the Jedi were evil, and he may have been convinced of that by Palpatine, but he had to accept that side. And part of that were decisions to break the Jedi Code before he even thought of the dark side. So in turn, I can also improve the inverse. Kylo's turn to the dark side was way more the fault of his surroundings than Anakin's. It had nothing to do with being born a slave or anything either. It was all down to Luke almost killing the boy in his sleep and getting caught with his lightsaber ready to do the deed. Luke even admitted that this was his fault. Of course, there's also a biological aspect to this. He's the grandson of Anakin and the nephew of Luke. One common thread in these movies is the temptation to the dark side being particularly strong with the Skywalkers, from Anakin actually turning to it, to Luke struggling with it both in the fight with Palpatine in Episode 6, and the near murder of his student, with the only Skywalker to not show any susceptibility to the dark side being Leia, and that's probably because she's barely a Force adept. That wasn't quite a whole page, but I think you get what I'm saying here. This isn't to try and dismiss Anakin's turn as unrelated to his environment, or Kylo's as completely due to his environment. Both of them had environmental factors that lead towards decisions they themselves had to make. But calling Anakin the one who had the least control of the two is actually ridiculous, when every single environmental factor was shown to be a reaction to his own decisions.
One of the most notable things about Anakin in the prequels was how he was a Jedi going against the philosophies of the Jedi Order, by forming a forbidden love with Padme and developing attachments with friends and other people he wished to protect. One of the fundamental teachings of the Jedi is to not let yourself become attached to anything, because they lead into things like fear, hate, temptation, and other stuff they view as bad. It's the reason why they never made Anakin a master in spite of his hard work. They already sensed his inability to let go of things he was afraid to lose and became too attached to them. Their teachings weren't necessarily bad, but they were imperfect enough to the point that it resulted in terrible mistakes, and Anakin's fall to the dark side was one of them. For example, let's look at the scene where Yoda tries to help Anakin cope with the inevitable possibility of losing Padme. His words are indeed wise, and they can help people who are going through the grief of losing a loved one. But in Anakin's case, they don't do anything to help his situation. Anakin grew to care for something bigger than himself. He truly valued his friendship with Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. It was more than just comrades in arms. They were genuine connections he risked his life for. And Padme was someone he wanted to share his life with. Someone he loved and wanted to keep safe. He was afraid of losing her. And he's not wrong for feeling those emotions. It makes him human, something that the audience can relate to. The problem stems from how the Jedi are stuck in their hubris, and too ignorant to change their worldview. Their ideology was too rational, which prevented them from making a better future for everyone. They viewed any sort of attachment as unhealthy, and sidelining that made them vulnerable. What they failed to understand was how those attachments, things like friends, love, marriage, and family, can actually make you stronger. And denying people those attachments can end up turning someone to the dark side. And the Jedi teachings were further proven to be faulty by how Luke helped Anakin defeat Palpatine in the end. It was those same attachments they spoke against, the kind that Luke was willing to have with his father after learning the truth, that ultimately brought balance to the Force. At least until Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, Rian Johnson, and J.J. Abrams came along and took a massive shit all over that.
Cool story, bro. Not only is this barely related to anything and another attempt to distract your audience from the movie you're actually supposed to be talking about, but let me just point out a little flaw in your argument. I mean, other than the fact that what happens at the end of Episode 6 is not balance of the Force. At all. It's one side destroying the other. That's not balance. You don't know what balance means. And neither did the Jedi Order, by the way. Which I feel like is a point you could make about the Jedi Order being wrong, but go off, I guess. We're just gonna ignore that for the moment. Luke refused to kill Ben because of his emotional attachments. Those exact same emotional attachments that are so good for Anakin are the very reason that Kylo Ren exists. They're also the reason for Kylo Ren's anger, the main thing about the character that you seem to hate. Look, saying that Yoda's right to ensure that Anakin needs to be willing to let go of personal attachments and then turning around and saying that very same mindset created Darth Vader is a little lopsided. It's technically true, but it's only true because of the fact that Anakin would have likely gone to the dark side for those reasons anyway. He agreed to abide by the Jedi Code, my guy. It was his decision to operate within these restrictions and learn these principles. Are you really going to blame other people for him changing his mind midway through? Are you also forgetting about the fact that there's a reason Anakin was considered too old to undergo Jedi training at 10? Fucking Christ, the Jedi Order knew this was something not likely to end well, as expressed in episode goddamn 1, you assberry!
What I'm saying is, the way Anakin acted out in the prequels, though understandably cringy at times, was completely understandable. I personally see his story as a much better version of Obito Uchiha from Naruto. He doesn't become evil because a loved one died. He becomes evil because he was afraid of losing people he cared about and was carefully manipulated into allowing that fear to consume him.
That was probably the worst comparison you could have made. First of all, their turns were not even remotely the same, and there's a huge flaw that's been looming over your entire interpretation of Anakin's fall that this reminded me to look at deeper to really debunk. So, first of all, the trajectories were kind of the opposite of each other. Obito had a single inciting incident that led him towards Madara's side, and while there was a bit of a slow burn up to that, it was more so an explanation of his morality than actually reflective of a shift in his character. His sense of loyalty and caring for Rin was why Kakashi's actions without context hurt him as much as they did. Now, here's the big comparison. For one, Anakin's build-up to the inciting incident was a gradual shift in the character's perceptions. But one major point of similarity between the two really fucks everything you've been saying, especially when you combine it with the difference that comes immediately after. Both of them made their decision as a strengthening of their own moral code, and while Obito listened to Madara with open ears because of a revelation, Anakin resigned himself to something that he didn't want. Sure, there was a disrespect from the Jedi Order, but the fact of the matter is that even in the act of turning, he still believed in what they stood for, but felt they no longer stood for it. So, how did the code push him away again? You can argue that emotion was what led him back to the light in his final moments, sure, but based on what's actually presented, you can also make the moral argument. I mean, just think about it. Son or no son, Palpatine was torturing a man that wasn't fighting back to death. That doesn't fall in line with Anakin's code of ethics, and it was the first time Vader's sense of honor in combat was challenged in the original trilogy. And look what happens. He chose the path of honor. Oh, and you mean to tell me that the guy who shrugs and goes, "Well, I killed the guy, guess I'm evil now," is better written than the guy who has seen so much death that he wants to create a world without it? Are you shitting me right now?
There's a sense of tragedy to the whole thing. Seeing a person who was actually really kind-hearted, showing compassion for others, doing everything he could to do the right thing, slowly sink into madness and lose everything.
Hey, I just remembered something really important. Wasn't this all supposed to be about Kylo Ren?
Anakin is a character who, whether you sympathize with him or not, is still interesting. And any character can be as moral or immoral as the writer wants them to be, as long as they manage to be well written and interesting. In the same way the Joker is an interesting character in spite of being the biggest mass murderer in the world. Now let's compare that to Kylo Ren, whose fall to the dark side we're supposed to find compelling because his uncle tried to kill him in his sleep. And he's angry about it. That's it. You're not gonna expand on this in any way?
Oh, fuck you. Your other example of a character being interesting is the Joker. Hey, you know what's not important about the Joker? His fucking backstory. It's so unimportant to what makes the character good that they either ignore it or joke about there being so many different versions of it that it's unclear what the actual truth is, which I'm aware is interesting in its own way, but even you yourself are pointing to examples of characters being engaging that have nothing to do with backstory. And that's not even talking about the fact that you're spending all this time comparing a character that goes from protagonist to antagonist in one trilogy to a character that goes from antagonist to protagonist as though they're supposed to have the same story arc. They aren't! They are different! Do you understand?
Even if Kylo is right to feel that way, just saying that is not compelling. You need to expand on this in some way, or it's just a weak piece of his backstory you didn't bother to go into.
To quote Epic Lloyd, we don't need the backstory of every fucking tree branch. This isn't his story right now, but he is a part of it. We don't need flashbacks to a bunch of Kylo Ren shit because Kylo Ren is not the protagonist of this story.
Do we see how Kylo was feeling after this event? Do we follow him in the days after this? Do we see the conflicting emotions he went through as he left his family behind? His training with Snoke? Anything that happened after this at all? Nothing.
Except we see his conflict through other things depicted in the movie. I pointed out that his lightsaber's chaotic design was a reflection of his own chaotic nature already. I pointed out that his hesitation to fire on his mom, and there's plenty more that isn't worth pointing out here, but the basic premise is this. We don't need 5 hours of Kylo Ren backstory. Like, take a look at Darth Vader from the original trilogy. We don't see Darth Vader's struggles between the dark side and the light side, or how he became Vader, or his struggles with abandoning his kids. But what the movie does show us tells us the aspects of that we actually do need to know. This is elaborated on in movies that we didn't know were going to exist at the time in more detail, which is where you get all of your information about Anakin's narrative being so compelling. Now riddle me this, Ponyman. Why in the hot dog flying fuck is that not allowed to apply here other than you being more obsessed with Kylo Ren literally being Vader than Kylo Ren was in the first fucking movie?
We only see this moment for a couple of seconds through 2 perspectives, and yet the film treats it like a major event in the story. I guess this could have been explored more if they dedicated more time to the final confrontation between Kylo and Luke, but the scene is just used as a ray of hope moment that foreshadows Rey as the new face of the Resistance, the Jedi, and newfound hope in the galaxy. There's no meaningful dialogue between the two, nothing that delves into their past relationship as master and student. They just have 2 extremely brief exchanges that only slightly reference their past together. That's it.
You only need a few lines of dialogue if those lines are pointed and reflections of themes that you've been placing into the audience throughout the film. Yoda telling Luke that a master shares his failures with his students and not just his successes leads directly into Luke apologizing for what he's done. Callbacks to the way that Luke speaks to a student. There doesn't need to be a 30-minute dialogue to say what a few lines say. Hell, Obi-Wan and Vader share 2 fucking lines, and that's all you need to make that battle mean something. Why not here?
There's no further development of the connection between these two beyond that. The scene feels too rushed, like they didn't have enough time to go more into it.
Taking more time doesn't make the story more impactful. In Halo Reach, for example, let me tell you about what got me. Noble 2's death. It wasn't because it was set up with this drawn-out dialogue of who she was and what her life was like. We got to know her as a teammate. There was no indication of anything coming until the precise moment the needle went through her skull. There was no time to mourn after, and there was no build-up beforehand. It was sudden, and it was earth-shaking. Further context outside of that moment was part of what gave power to that moment and made it truly terrifying, and quite possibly the point where you realize that anyone can be taken down at any given moment. It wasn't even lots of dialogue and telling us how important she is either. It's the other aspects of the story that inform that. You don't need lines to explicitly say things sometimes. Kylo's murderous intent, the reasons we're given behind it, what we see throughout the movie of Luke's regret, those are what we need to inform the power of that scene, because the filmmakers trust us as an audience to be smart enough to invest in the weight of it without having to be told explicitly. But then again, the average MLP audience. Yes, I fucking went there!
Which they might have been able to do if they didn't waste a third of the film on that bullshit with Finn and Rose. It's sort of like the scene in the throne room where Kylo tries to get Rey to join him, telling her that she needs to let the past die or kill it if she has to. It should leave a strong impact, but because of the execution it just feels empty. The basic idea is that you shouldn't stay mired in the past or become obsessed with it, and you have to move forward to grow and become stronger. Now the idea itself is not bad, but the presentation is problematic. The issue comes from how the line is phrased, describing the past as something that should be killed or left to die, which is totally different from simply leaving it behind and moving forward.
See, part of the point here is that his logic is, in fact, twisted and flawed. Even though, that exact concept of letting the past be forgotten is why Yoda strikes lightning onto the Jedi archives, because it's time for the way of the Jedi to end. This is especially jarring since it would be replicated with almost the exact same phrasing as what Kylo Ren used, mind you, in one of the most praised movies in the last decade, released the year after The Last Jedi. Are you fucking dense?
I think there's a reason why Timon said you gotta put the past behind you instead of you gotta kill the past, or leave it to die.
Yeah. For one, they were talking about letting something that is ended remain ended. In the case of The Last Jedi, the point is to let a thing that should be end reach that conclusion. That, and for the sake of a joke, and the fact that The Lion King is actively made for kids, whereas this movie is made for an older audience. And Pumbaa isn't the supreme leader of the space Nazis, you chuckle fuck!
Remember, this is being said by Kylo Ren, who's a homicidal maniac who will backstab anyone to get what he wants. I don't think taking any life lesson from him to heart is exactly a good idea.
It's almost like he's the villain who's saying a thing that a villain would say. I'm gonna skip every time you say something that's just Kylo Ren as a bad guy from here because, yeah, no shit.
And this advice is not just unhealthy, it's also hypocritical. His exact words are to let the past die, and yet he reverts to his past behavior of being a cold-blooded killer. I get the notion that we're not supposed to take this with any sincerity because Kylo is the villain trying to gaslight Rey, but it's such a forced and poorly delivered line that it makes you wonder why it's even in the film in the first place.
For one, congratulations, you know that your whole spiel about Kylo being unsympathetic is dog shit, good job. Second of all, I highly disagree with your opinion. You even pointed out how it reflects his aggression and how it's extreme, which is still part of Kylo's personality. And what he said was, let old things die, and he's in particular talking about Snoke and Luke. It is something said after he kills his master. Your idea of this being forced is moot. Like, I can't debunk that it was delivered poorly because poor delivery without any other context for what is bad really is just meaningless drivel. So there's not only no need to, but it's impossible to disprove your argument on that front anyway. It's just too nebulous to say without saying what was bad about the delivery.
People have taken this as Rian Johnson telling people to abandon everything they knew about Star Wars and to accept this new trilogy as the norm, and I would totally believe that. Because everything about this new trilogy is Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, Rian Johnson, and J.J. Abrams murdering the legacy of Star Wars and destroying its reputation. People who have no knowledge or respect for the franchise and have no idea how to properly represent it outside of cheap nostalgia baiting.
Which is why you keep comparing it to the OT and the prequels without awareness that the OT and the prequels did the exact things you're saying this movie does wrong. Based.
I also love the irony that Disney allowed this line to slip into the film despite that they're constantly milking their past bone dry with those god-awful remakes.
Which are also reinterpretations of prior material that have differences they want the audience to accept. I shouldn't be able to debunk a joke conceptually in a single fucking sentence.
It's almost as ironic as them allowing that subplot about how rich people are bad as they continue to buy out every single property that's still hiding from their greedy claws.
They gave context for rich people being bad because they are fueling the war effort on both sides. They called the rich people bad for what made them rich, not simply being fucking rich. Did you actually watch this movie?
And yet, we're supposed to take him seriously because he ends up pulling off a shocking plot twist by killing Snoke and becoming the new Supreme Ruler, before even bothering to do anything compelling with Snoke. And even that doesn't mean anything because Palpatine was the mastermind behind everything anyway.
You know, that is a valid complaint, although I'd like to point out that it's more of an issue with Snoke than with Kylo. It's something I complain about too, then basically toss Snoke aside for Palpatine. And to be honest, it would have been better if Kylo either killed Snoke in the third movie, or it was just the villain in the third movie and we're tossing Snoke aside without bringing in Palpatine. But that's not the fault of this character, and it's not entirely the fault of this movie. It's a little bit the fault of this movie, though.
He might have been intimidating at first, but now he's just become pathetic by the end of the movie. I mean, consider this. Kylo ordered that barrage of laser fire on Luke and didn't intend on letting it stop until Hux intervened. He clearly hates him with a fiery undying passion over the incident at the temple, and you might say he's justified in feeling that way because he was thinking about attacking him. But in a way, that just makes it even worse. Luke's actions don't warrant that kind of extreme response.
Yes, that is in fact wait, what am I doing?
Remember when Obi-Wan betrayed Anakin? When he thought he turned Padme against him? When he cut off his limbs and left him to die after being set on fire? Yeah, that was some really messed up shit. And yet when Anakin came across Obi-Wan on the Death Star, he wasn't nearly as unhinged as Kylo was with Luke. He didn't force choke him, he didn't try to crush his body, he didn't try to repeatedly blast him. It was a simple lightsaber duel. In spite of what Obi-Wan did, Anakin as Darth Vader was reserved and cautious. He wasn't screaming in anger or charging in blind rage, he meticulously battled him with a sense of stability. In comparison, yes, Luke had his lightsaber ignited with thoughts of killing Kylo, but he wasn't going to dismember him and have him set on fire. Kylo is so so blinded by bloodlust and hatred when what Luke did was actually small potatoes compared to what Obi-Wan did to Anakin. And in spite of that, he ordered that endless barrage of lasers and demanded more of it. He attacks Luke in blind rage, screaming in unbridled anger. Kylo is clearly the unhinged one when you put him back to back with Darth Vader.
Yeah, he sure is. Now, I should have just continued skipping because a lot of this I can respond to with no shit, but something worth noting about the comparison. Kylo had weaponry intended to take down vehicles and shot Luke with them. Darth Vader had a lightsaber on him when he encountered Obi-Wan. Notably, the Force choke is really only used on those who are weak in the Force. He doesn't do it to Palpatine or Obi-Wan or Luke. He mostly does it to subordinates, really, but the point is that both of them took actions that were intended to be as immediately lethal as possible. Now, of course, Kylo's actions were overkill driven out of anger, but the fact remains that, of course, Darth Vader didn't open a massive amount of blaster fire on Obi-Wan. They were inside a ship, he had a lightsaber, he was like, "I'm gonna kill you now," and didn't hesitate to act on that when Obi-Wan gave him the opportunity to. Kylo also didn't try to torture Luke, he tried to kill him very quickly. One could even argue that part of the point of firing everything at him was to try and make sure that he would die because of an inborn fear of him from what happened as a child. And what's the first part of Yoda's speech about the dark side again? Fear leads to anger. Oh, and by the way, more importantly...
You want a different example? Okay, how about this scene from episode 5, when our heroes escaped from Cloud City and Vader was there to see it happen. Remember the tension when the bridge crew was silent, waiting for Vader to do something? You would expect him to lash out in anger, right? Killing one of the stormtroopers for failing him? And you know what he does? He simply walks away. No cry of anger, no hint of violence, no hint that he was upset with the stormtroopers, nothing. If this was Kylo, he would have taken out his saber and started destroying the nearest piece of machinery in a fit of rage. But Vader doesn't do that. And oddly enough, that just makes him so much more intimidating. Vader demonstrating his ability to restrain himself even when he ends up going through a defeat is really chilling.
Okay, but first of all... And second of all, the fact that you feel the need to say oddly enough about making Vader more intimidating indicates that you know it's not objectively a negative towards Kylo Ren. It is just a difference in the two characters, which is fine because, as pointed out in the first movie, Kylo Ren is in fact not Darth Vader. Yes, a cold and calculating villain is intimidating and scary because it seems like no emotions can sway them from what they want to do. A villain that is prone to fits of rage, though, has unpredictability, which can be incredibly scary on a villain, even if intimidating isn't the right word. That's part of how the movie Split worked, you chuckle fuck. You even pointed out earlier how the unhinged nature of Kylo Ren scared you. So it's almost like I should extend my skip screen gag to cover the entirety of the clip I played. But I'm not going to do that because it was a joke in the first place.
He managed to be terrifying by behaving in the exact opposite manner you would expect a terrifying villain to act in this kind of situation. That shit is fucking brilliant. Nothing J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson did with Kylo throughout these 3 movies ever comes close to this one scene in The Empire Strikes Back.
Man, you really are mad that Kylo Ren isn't Vader, aren't you? Also, point of order, Vader was subversive for his time, yeah, but when most villains become cold and heartless, one that is unhinged and unpredictable becomes the new method of subverting expectations. Not that something even needs to be subversive in order to be good. I mean, as I said when I unintentionally jumped the gun on my script, that principle I was talking about is the exact point of Split. You know, the good M. Night Shyamalan movie. Anybody else remember Split? I wish he didn't ruin Glass, man. Fuck me.
And even when you take out the fits of rage and unbridled tendencies, he's not even an interesting antagonist because he's far less motivated than Anakin in the prequels, or even Palpatine, and he was basically just Space Hitler.
Okay, so first of all, let's compare the character whose entire point is to be the main character of a Fall from Grace story to a character who is pinned as antagonistic from day one. And you know those fits of rage at suffering a defeat? Those are indications of motivation and failure getting under his skin. It shows that he is motivated to succeed. It's not the most complex thing in the world, but it doesn't fucking need to be.
And not only is Kylo less motivated, his actual motivations are just baffling. His only sympathetic motivation for turning to the dark side was because Luke thought about killing him. But that motivation doesn't sit right when you consider how he killed his father in the last film. He demonizes Luke for thinking about killing his nephew, but doesn't hesitate to kill his own father. This just makes him nothing short of a hypocrite. His backstory is hardly explored and rushed as hell.
Neither is Vader's until they made 3 more movies about it. Also, this just in, bad guys are required to be sympathetic and cannot be hypocritical. Nope, bad guys must all be presented as good people put in a bad situation. Is this just going to be the entire rest of the Kylo Ren segment?
Which, by the way, the rise of retcons introduces force healing and resurrection, which completely destroys Anakin's whole motivation for turning to the dark side in the first place.
Except no, it fucking doesn't! Okay, so even if we operate with the fact that force healing isn't explained in the movie as something that most people don't know how to do, The Mandalorian shows the strain of force healing on someone when Grogu heals Karga. So it's clearly not something that can be done lightly, even if it were a common technique. Jedi healers were also present in the prequel trilogy, most notably Stas Ailey, who was one of the first casualties of Order 66. Oh, but the resurrection thing? Yeah, there's an explanation for that in the movies. It can only be done between a dyad and the Force, which is why Kylo is able to do it to Rey. And guess what? Ben gave up his own life to do that. Yeah, don't act like Anakin's motivation was completely gone because a dyad can kill off one to save the other, fuckface. So, tell me who the one flying in the face of the established lore is again?
Then it all comes full circle in Return of the Jedi, where the Emperor's threats of destroying his son breaks the dark side's hold on him, and he sacrifices himself to save Luke. That is a three-dimensional character with a three-dimensional character arc. With Kylo, nobody seemed to be bothered with giving in the most basic amount of depth, with his reasons for being bad because Palpatine was whispering funny voices in his head, which he seems to have no reaction to when it's revealed.
Other than, killing him a few minutes later after seeing the deception. And didn't you say an earlier character you expected to be angry having no visible reaction is scary? And didn't you say how Kylo tends to get angry? So wouldn't the fact that this deception didn't visibly anger him throw up some flags for what was about to happen? And you said it came out of nowhere? See, that's the thing. If you think about the words you're saying for more than 2 seconds, your entire logic falls apart.
Kylo as a character is bland and sulky at best, and petulant and laughably bipolar at worst. It certainly doesn't help that he got his ass handed to him in the first film, and yet he still tries to act like this unstoppable badass war machine.
It's called a coping mechanism. And he spends more than half the movie trying to coax Rey towards his side because he knows she's a threat to him. Mind you, he got his ass kicked because it was 2 against 1 and he was stabbed. And you know what? Fuck it, you even pointed out the bipolar thing I did earlier, but decided it was bad writing instead of a three-dimensional aspect of the character because you didn't want to like this fucking movie.
Yeah, that's exactly what he is. Kylo Ren is inconsistent, and his arc is filled with giant holes like how they completely neglect the fact that he became Supreme Leader and nothing changes. No one comments on it, there's no conflict with Snoke's allies, no one complains except for Hux who immediately gets force choked for speaking out of term, and he still acts like an edgy teenager.
And you just explained why no one else questioned him. The entire question of his leadership was addressed with him shutting down Hux. He even had a cover story for who actually killed Snoke. He was already in charge right below Snoke. And the only other person who had the kind of authority needed to question it at all was already shut down in his objections. So what the fuck is there left in that conflict exactly? Other than Hux's inevitable and sudden betrayal in the next movie, that is. Oh, yeah, right. The thing you said was proof that they didn't know what they were doing with Hux? Oop.
Even that let the past die scene is ultimately meaningless as it doesn't change his character in any way. He just goes back to being angry when Rey rejects him. Was it because he was caught between legacies and wanted to take things in his own direction? He just ends up taking orders from Palpatine, so his epiphany ultimately means nothing.
That's somewhat of a fair complaint, although he does start the movie actually wanting to get rid of Palpatine as a threat, rather than taking orders from him, so it's not like it's completely pointless. It's just a step within that path, one that twists and turns. So, eat one, I guess. And let me talk about this ultimately pointless thing, because honestly, the more I think about it, the only thing that I can think of that really meaning is that because he changed his mind, this decision doesn't matter, which is horsecock. I'm sorry, but he also changed his mind about working with Palpatine in the first place. Hux changed his mind about being on Kylo Ren's side, even if he still was loyal to the Empire. There are so many characters that change their mind in media, and it is explained well. In professional wrestling, that is called turning face or turning heel. It happens in media. Why are you... It's just calling it ultimately pointless simply because he changed his mind that really fucking bothered me here.
And you know another reason that line means nothing? Because we never actually see Kylo's past. All we know is that he used to be an apprentice to Luke and he betrayed him. What about his early life with his parents? His life on the island? His relationship with the other students? The lessons he learned about the Jedi and Sith? Not even his years working under Snoke? Why didn't we get to actually see his past? Why is it that the only thing we get from him is 2 or 3 flashbacks that show the exact same thing?
Maybe because his viewpoint of letting old things die was something established in the first movie? That was the point of him breaking his obsession with Vader. That was the point of him killing Han that I skipped over you bitching about. That was the point of him wanting to kill Luke, and the point of him killing Snoke. He wants the past gone. And sure, he hesitates with Leia, but that in part is an indication that this ideal of killing the past of his is something that he still struggles with to some degree at the beginning of the second movie. We don't see his past as much because we only see what matters to his viewpoint. We see the reason he wants it gone, and that's all you need.
Oh, almost forgot to talk about how Kylo killing Snoke was a terrible writing decision. They kill him in the most arbitrary way possible and they didn't bother to explain anything about his background, his motivations, how long he's been around, his rise to power, anything. This isn't like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction that's supposed to remain a mystery. Snoke was the main villain and a major character. His presence raises a lot of questions relating directly to the story that demand being answered, and they're never given any satisfying answers.
I mean, they are answered in the next movie, but...
I mean satisfying answers. We were being led to believe that he was someone important, but now it turns out he's no one. Just a pawn in Palpatine's game that was expendable. So it's just another huge waste of time.
Yeah, that. This is one of the things I kind of agree with. So let me put on my writer hat for a second. Let's remove all this stuff about Palpatine that comes up in the next movie. Or even if we keep it, let's make it so that Kylo taking Palpatine's order is a slower burn to completion. Or even have Palpatine be the actual reason for Kylo to return to the light side. Or, you know, anything better written than Palpatine just being Junko Enoshima. And let's still kill off Snoke here and make Kylo Ren our primary villain. I mean, part of what that can do is display just how ruthless and powerful Kylo has grown to be. But let's make Snoke more of a threat so that Kylo's actions have more weight behind them. How do we do that? With him doing more to torture Rey, maybe. Possibly, but that verges on being a little bit icky. Showing some backstory, maybe. Not really, that just shows more of Kylo's motivation. The solution is actually kind of simple. We have him take a more active role during the rest of the movie. We take scenes we already have, and we add Snoke giving more of the orders. But, you know, notably Palpatine also doesn't show up until the very end of the original trilogy as well, and is only in the background occasionally giving orders to Vader. So, you know, maybe killing Snoke in the third movie is a better option if you're going to build him up more.
You can't just build up the main villain like this and then suddenly go, yoink, that's not good writing. It wasn't okay when Naruto did it, and it's definitely not better here.
So, it is a good move when Star Wars does it in the OT? Yeah, sure, okay. Don't see a contradiction there.
You can't just build up the main villain like this and then suddenly go, yoink, that's not good writing. It wasn't okay when Naruto did it, and it's definitely not better here. In spite of the faults of the prequels, they did an excellent job with the slow and gradual reveal of the Emperor. Over the course of 3 movies, they take the time to establish his goals, his motivations, his personality, his schemes, and when we see him for what he truly is, we know a lot about him. They might not have revealed everything, but they revealed what we needed to be invested in the character. With Snoke, they reveal nothing. They did nothing of value with him. He just sits in his throne room, toys around with Rey for a bit, and then gets killed by Kylo. There's no payoff in this. And a plot twist is supposed to have a meaningful payoff. This is just a meaningless subversion of our expectations.
So when the OT did the same thing with Palpatine before the prequels existed, that was good because... Do you see the problem here yet?
Something you can tell Rian Johnson likes to do way too much.
Except you just earlier pointed out how Darth Vader subverting the expectations of the villain's anger was a good thing in the OT. Hypocrisy, thy name is MisAnthro. Also, watch Knives Out.
There are people who actually think this is a good twist for absolutely no reason other than it caught them off guard and they didn't see it coming. Like, that's supposed to automatically equate to good writing. If you actually think Kylo killing Snoke is a good twist just because it caught you off guard and you didn't see it coming, you're an idiot.
Funny, because you using this as an excuse to throw an insult at Blaze the Movie Fan was a twist I didn't see coming, and I thought it was fucking terrible and just plain in poor taste. Because different people are allowed to like different things, you elitist prick. But let's look at this from the perspective of someone who saw it coming pretty quick and still thought it was good. I've explained my reasonings for this, how it reflects Kylo's character, the fact that the OT did it but later, and I've even expressed problems I had with it. See, what I'm doing here is still saying that there are problems, but also paying enough attention to what I'm watching to understand the point of it, and also explaining the things that I do and do not like in a way that actually makes my point, instead of changing my story to not like something that I earlier stated was a good thing. Do you see how not hard that is yet?
A twist is not good just because it catches you by surprise. I previously made a video explaining that, too if you want to count this one. In order for a plot twist to work, it needs to properly align with what was established beforehand. Something that helps the story make more sense upon a second or third viewing. There has to be some kind of build-up to it, and it needs to fit with the way the characters were portrayed beforehand.
Yes, and as we all know, a Sith killing his master is not at all something makes sense in the lore of Star Wars. I ask you again, do you actually watch these movies?
To get what I mean, let's take a look at what is considered one of the biggest plot twists in history. The reveal that Snape was protecting Harry all along, and that he was a triple agent for Dumbledore.
Really? That's your example of one of the biggest twists of all time? Dude, what about The Sixth Sense? That's an even better example of what I know you're about to say. And by the way, yes, I know what you're about to say before you even say it, because you drag your points out so much and are so fucking predictable that the biggest twist that could come from this video is me turning it off and running into the woods, never to be seen again.
The reason why this plot twist works is because it does everything properly. It enhances the narrative upon multiple viewings. It's gradually set up instead of coming out of nowhere. And they spent 7 books or 8 films developing Snape as a character, and his relationship with the other characters. A lot was revealed about the character to establish investment in him so the twist has a stronger impact. His actions make sense upon revisiting certain parts of the story, and it paints his character in a new positive light without contradicting anything that came before. This is a subversion of our expectations done properly, because it provides the audience with a meaningful payoff. In comparison, Snoke's death is done specifically for cheap shock value instead of fueling the strength of the story, and it amounts to nothing.
It builds the threat of Kylo Ren as a villain. I debunked what you're taking 22 hours to say in a few words. Shut the holy balls fuck up. Please!
Kylo killing Snoke doesn't change the story because it's still the same generic good versus evil formula we've already seen in the previous films. It just rushes his status as the new villain in such a horrible way.
If we're looking at this from a franchise-wide perspective, first I want to look at the way Snoke approached Kylo in the first movie, telling him his attachments were holding him back. While in the immediate, this is a reflection of Kylo killing Han, this also reflects onto his attachment of Kylo Ren to appeasing the orders of Snoke. He gained more control of his destiny by getting rid of the only thing controlling it. And notice how the moment was executed. Snoke was looking into his mind and he could see Kylo killing his enemy, only to reveal that enemy was Snoke himself. The rest of the movie did build up Kylo considering Rey as an ally, and this was part of the payoff of that. He did want Rey to be an ally. On the dark side. This is on top of the other ways I pointed out killing Snoke makes sense, by the way. But let's go back to that rushed in the worst way comment. Why, yes, I do partially agree that this moment should have happened in the third movie. I can justify why having Kylo solidify his connection to the dark side with killing his master works here. Even without the obvious lie of your point involving the character's direction in the third movie, but first I need to play the next thing you say, because what I'm about to say directly answers that point. But before I do that, I have 2 weeks of Genshin Impact to play, excuse me.